We're only a couple of months late to come up to date with daylight savings. Anyway, so we're now at the point of debating the hang on, just double checking that we have the quorum. I think we have, on my calculation. Yep. So we're ready to roll, and councillors wishing to speak to the recommendations. I have none, so I'll put the resolution. I still have none.
This one.
Just give me a chance. I will put the resolution. Okay. I knew that was too good to be true. We'll start with Councillor Deputy Mayor. Do you want to start, or? No. Okay. So we have Councillor John Watson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, I've got a few things I'd like to say. I feel a little bit uncomfortable with proceedings today, to be honest, and I don't like these sorts of meetings where we kind of jump to the here and now, and we have the state of crisis that is exemplified in point 20 about the sponsors urgently address the identified shortfall and advise of their response by the first week in May. Yes. And we have a sense that, this decision today has to be made, and made in terms of the questions that have been made today in the absence of adequate information, in my view, given the extent of, it looks like I have to avoid the word blowout, extent of the distressing escalation. I guess most people in the public would call an increase of $2 billion a blowout. It maybe didn't happen yesterday, but it's a blowout. It's nearly double the cost that we went out and consulted on. And I took a bit of time over the last couple of days just to go through and look at what we were saying about the cost. And certainly there was a degree of precision there from the word go that's not been reflected in the comments today. I remember that extraordinary meeting of 2014 where there was almost a quibbling over the figure that we were going out with, which was 2.3 billion. And to be on the right side of the audit department, that was up a bit to 2.48 to ensure that that allowed for any delay in the work. So there was a degree of precision that certainly characterised our public consultation. Councillors of the time, as I mentioned earlier, raised questions about the cost. Some of them wrote to the Auditor General expressing their concern about the possibility of escalation and asked for transparency, asked for a response. That happened in 2016. Right through 2016, right up to 2017, Auckland Transport, via its CEO David Warburton, said a figure in the newspaper that talked about it escalating to $3 billion was wrong, and that the cost estimate, and I'm quoting verbatim here, remained at $2.5 billion, plus or minus 20%. So they weren't just talking about it going up, and I recall this myself. There was a very real possibility that it wouldn't reach 2.5 billion. That was certainly reflected in the Mayor of the time and also in the comments of Mr. Warburton, who was the CEO. After that, then we certainly had more of an indication that this might be more like 2.8 to 3.4 billion when the government became involved, and they apparently, if news reports were right, insisted that a dollar figure be made public when that heads of agreement was signed, and that's where we got to the 2.8 to the 3.4 billion. Now, of course, it's 4.4 billion, and it's urgently needed. I don't think the notion that this 2014 figure that Councillor Lee referred to was somehow prehistoric and was a starting point that was never going to be attained. That is not the narrative that unfolded in those years, right up to 2017, and indeed past that. So it is a blowout. It is a major escalation. $1 billion, and I deal in the all-up costs because Auckland is a taxpayers too, so they don't just pay rates, they pay tax. That billion just refers to the latest increase. So I guess if we were to think what the public would be saying about this, then they've got to have concerns, not just to the extent to which the cost has increased to, but also what the repercussions of that are. Because as much as we're dealing with our supposed solutions here that on the face of it, don't seem to inflict too much harm on the ratepayers, we know that in other aspects of council's operations, the big concrete door has already been drawn shut. We go to community facilities, is told no new money. So there will be ongoing consequences in terms of budgets and other allocations. And of course we know that there is no guarantee that it might not blow out again even further. I guess though, Mr Mayor, to really get to the crux of it for me is I don't have any confidence in the integrity of our costs, of our costings. Major decisions are being made in this council where the costs have been shown to be wildly astray. We have decisions being made with stadiums that make the CRL look like the epitome of forensic accuracy when it comes to costing. They're 800% over budget. This was 2 billion over. How can you make meaningful decisions and consult when there is such a disparity between what you say a thing is going to cost and what it ends up costing? So I would say that there is a real credibility gap here. I'm not inclined just to get herded into the pen and just give the tick of approval as if this was all too predictable. It is predictable in the way that it has ended up turning out in the end, but it's certainly not predictable in terms of people that are consulted or given information in good faith. So we all know we can't just cover the hole in or not continue, but I would like to see pursued, rather than just sort of some verbal approach, some genuine, written, detailed, comprehensive argument as to the council's perilous position in terms of its budget going forward, and to the need to, at the very least, look at some sort of deferral mechanism until our finances look a little bit more rosier, perhaps further down the line. I think that would be the least. It would address the issue of not being seen to be getting something over at the government's expense, and it would perhaps go some way to providing some sort of room for us to ensure that this gross escalation does not affect the operation of Auckland City as a whole.
Thank you, Councillor. Other councillors wishing to speak? Deputy Mayor Cashmore.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. This is one of the biggest projects this country's ever seen, and it is largely unpredictable. Digging into the dirt, creating transport networks all over the world is problematic. There's a great genesis to this project, the great heritage to it. So when I look back through how it started, Mayor Robbie, you all know, he's standing there waving his fist in the air every time we come across Aotea Square. He was pro getting this done. They could never get the political backing to make it happen. In 2003, in December, the chairman of the Auckland City Council Transport Committee, Greg McEwen, who some of you will know, got through council for the forward work plan to be done, and the costs then were estimated at 500 million. Estimated. In November 2010, there was a feasibility for the tunnel link was undertaken and pushed forward by Mayor Len Brown at that time. Also in 2010, on 25th of November, a resolution requesting Auckland Council Chief Executive work collaboratively with Auckland Transport negotiations with the Crown of Metro Rail funding. It was moved by Mike Lee and seconded by Councillor Casey. So that was progressing the proposition forward back in that time. And so forth it goes on. The Minister of Transport's review of the City Rail Link business case in 3rd of May 2011, estimated cost $2 billion. Alternative funding for transport in July 2012. 2015, the early works contracts were approved. And so forth. In January Prime Minister John Key announced the government in principle in support of the project. And many of us were present at the bottom of Queen Street when they had that celebration. Some of the real big milestones were Sir Brian Roach was appointed in 2016, and Sir Brian is one of the preeminent project deliverers in this country, and perhaps even in Australasia, world recognised. And he has a very competent board around him. The sponsors' agreement was signed on the 30th of June 2017. And that was the start of the real works and the confirmation. 700 million's been spent to date. 700 million. And the contracts of going up Albert Street, yes, they are running behind time and they are over budget, but that's at the contractor's expense. The model going forward is an alliance model, simply because the risk appetite in the companies, as was spelt out by Sir Brian and Sean Sweeney this morning, is not there. They don't have to do this project. There is plenty of other projects in Australasia for them to complete. And you also have to look at it in context. We are spending $2.8 billion a year in delivering ATAP. 2.8 billion. There's a line-by-line undertaking from the Minister of Transport to progress with that.
28.
It would be irresponsible. It would be irresponsible for any councillor now to say, we can't confirm this budget adjustment. We heard from Sir Brian and Sean Sweeney, the CE, that the contractors and the applicants would very likely walk away. And there would be subsequent price escalation. It would cause delay and add huge cost, and would only deliver more uncertainty to the construction market. That would not be a good place for us to be in, or indeed a responsible or sensible place for us to be in. Projects of this scale and complexity are virtually impossible to forecast the pricing of. I don't know how many of you have been down in the tunnel under Albert Street. There's piping out down there that they never knew existed, which is why it's taken so much longer and added more cost. Piping wasn't even on any map. And a lot of the ones that were on the maps weren't anywhere near where they said they were. So the accuracy around this stuff is problematic. The average person who builds a house or does alterations probably comes in well over budget. And that's probably only a few $100,000, or maybe $750,000 if you're building up market somewhere else. This is a multi-billion-dollar project and 100 times more complex than any house renovation. Mr. Mayor, it's been a challenging exercise all the way through. My hand never shook so much as it did when we signed that agreement a couple of years back with the then Minister of Transport. But it has to be done. We cannot resolve to not do it. We cannot resolve to delay. This has to be done to deliver Sir Dovemeyer Robinson's promise and to deliver the biggest outcomes for improvement for this city's infrastructure, for its transportation and for its economy. This is the game changer. It is our #1 priority and must be delivered. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Councillor Wayne Walker.
Speaking to the item, I'm going to raise some concerns that I've already effectively pointed to in my questions. First off, I'm very disturbed that we're proceeding to fund something when we haven't determined what the ownership is and who's going to benefit, as it goes to both the capital and the operation. I think Mike Lee would tell you that we're not going to be able to fund the operation of this exercise because it's going to be a significant cost. We already know, because Auckland Transport have presented to us, that we can't fund the increase in buses that are necessary around Auckland. We already know that. So we're in an incredible dilemma. And why would you lose your bargaining now when you've got your best opportunity to deal with those issues. And I get, frankly, very disturbed when I have to ask and almost plead the officers to prepare what amounts to an effective business case that demonstrates how the government benefits, because they get the benefit from income tax, from GST, from reduction in unemployment, for reduction in the crash rate, and all of these things. They get the benefits from that, and what follows is their financial benefits, and they're in by far the best position to pay. And because the City Rail Link and the associated rail network also takes cars off the road on their arterial and their motorway network, they get the benefit from that as well. We need to have the numbers around that so we can put an effective case to government, and we should be doing that right now. And the public of Auckland deserve to know that, because how else are they going to get in behind us if they haven't got that information? The other thing that's of great concern to me, and again I continue to ask for it, is where are the studies around the increases needed in carpooling, bicycles, e-bikes, electric cars? Where are they going to charge up? The taxis, the mobility, the additional spaces that people living in the city are going to require for parking, against a background where apartments are not providing any parking spaces. And where are the additional workers going to be able to park, those of them that are coming from parts of Auckland for some time in the future that are not well served by public transport? And what are the projections for those things? So I'm not comfortable in Auckland Transport just putting that off and us advancing on the potentiality of losing control of our parking spaces that are the logical places to provide those spaces for cars. And those spaces in the parking buildings are much more satisfactory, much more effective, much more environmentally friendly than providing those spaces on the street network. And what is going to be the impact of pedestrianising Queen Street and the other streets and the parking requirements? What are the answers to these fundamental questions? And as councillors, we don't have the answers to those questions because they don't front up with them. So I get, again, very uncomfortable being put in this position. The other thing that I find disturbing is, on a personal basis, I raised the likelihood of a $1 billion cost overrun successively through the long-term plan and successively through a previous annual plan. And I asked for scenarios, and I asked for the work to be done in advance so that we as councillors had a game plan and not a circumstance where we get stuff at the last minute. So I find it very disturbing to be here today and basically to have things at the last minute against a background where I've asked for that information much earlier and support from fellow councillors and the Mayor. So I just want to put those concerns on the table. There is an amendment by way of addition that I put up. It's C4. The officers have that. That lists a range of considerations that I would suggest all of the councillors would agree with that should be examined in advance of addressing this issue of the parking buildings. So where, for example, is the mobility parking going to go, the loading zones, the waste collection and recycling, the pedestrianisation, the additional bus lanes? What's the impact of light rail up Queen Street as it goes to parking? Carpooling, which is the single biggest thing we could be doing in Auckland to take cars off the road. So I would seek your support for that amendment by way of addition. I think it's a no-brainer. The reason for having it there is to make sure that it happens, because I have no confidence that those things are otherwise going to be looked at and reported back to us for.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor, you haven't moved your amendment formally and you have now spoken. Could you get another councillor? Can you just, in the next couple of minutes, find another councillor who will move it on your behalf? but I'm sorry, you have to, yeah, I'm sorry, you need to move it formally. That's understanding orders. Doesn't mean that it can't be moved by somebody else, but because you've already spoken, you needed to move it before you spoke. So,
Have I finished speaking?
yes, you have. Right, further speakers? Councillor Newman.
Thank you. I do want to move an amendment by way of addition to the resolutions, the main resolutions, and that is because whatever we do here today in relation to the commitment to increase the funding, we have not addressed this matter through the draft annual plan. Fine. That's okay. The mechanism that I understand now is for us to identify the inconsistent decision, and that is set out in section 80 of the Act, and we would need to identify the inconsistency and the reasons for the inconsistency. This is not about politics. I think that we just need to flag that at the time that we went through the formal consultation on the draft annual plan, we did not have the information available at the moment that would inform the draft plan in relation to the cost and the needing to increase the budget by $500 million for City Rail Link. So I foreshadow, I've moved that, and I understand that Councillor Fletcher will second that amendment. Your Worship, it is undoubtedly the case that this project has gone too far to revisit, and I wouldn't want to revisit it, but there is no doubt that there is a lot more that we already know, which are consequential costs coming, consequential capital costs coming, and grade separation is an example of that. And it's not something decades in advance. This is something that's been talked about for a long time, but it hasn't been addressed. Why hasn't it been addressed? I think that actually historically we have a bad habit of lowballing very expensive capital projects in order to try and get them over the line politically, and then we find that the costs get recalibrated. I'm using that word as a polite alternate to a different phrase that I've heard today, recalibrated over time. And there has been scope creep here, but it doesn't address the issue of grade separation. And so the cost to ratepayers of Auckland will be much higher than what has been put up here today. We've had an earlier cost in 2014. We've got a cost today, which is a P50 cost, 50% chance it could go higher. There is grade separation to follow. It will be very expensive. And I think that it is worth noting that we have had a 2.5% rate increase, but it's been 2.5% plus, and my constituents in South Auckland, every time they go to the petrol station, they pay 11.5 cents more at the pump. So the cost is going up significantly. Your Worship, I am pleased that you have indicated your willingness to make an amendment to take the issue of car park sales out of the resolutions that are recommended, recommendation C1. The EBITDA results for the car park buildings were very, very compelling. It shouldn't have been there in the first place. And if we had gone down that path, and I assume actually we still could, because we don't categorically say it will never happen, but I don't want to see the situation whereby in order to sell revenue-earning assets, we create an air duopoly in the CBD in relation to off-street car parking. Your Worship, I have to say that I listened carefully to what you said about the government's lack of willingness to reconsider the issue of cost, and I think, to summarise what you said, the ministers have told you, well, this council went into an agreement with the previous government around this project, and it was on a 50-50 cost basis. there are senior ministers in this government that stood in opposition to the previous government in relation to the formation of Auckland Council and some of the consequential decisions emerging from that. I had in a quiet moment, I went back and had a look. I think that the Minister of Transport ought to be called on the private members bill that he introduced in opposition, the Local Government Protection of Auckland Assets Amendment Bill, because he indicated in that debate there was a real concern about changes in Auckland which would be a Trojan horse for assets that are community owned to become private assets over time. And I think that that concern exists today. So I do think that there is a need to go back to government and say, where else in this country is there a major investment in the rail network that is funded by local government? To the extent that Auckland is that we don't even have control of our transport network in Auckland because Auckland Transport is its own road control committee, its own standalone CCO. It seems to be very, very standalone, and we don't have control, but we seem to do all the payment. So I want to say, Your Worship, that I have concerns about what we approve today because I believe that there is a real risk that the cost will go higher, that the cost as it increases is not properly accounted for in terms of how we will meet that cost, that we haven't addressed this in terms of the draft annual plan, and that I believe that the government is unfairly pushing far too much of the cost back onto ratepayers in Auckland who are already paying substantially more at the pump. The only part of the country with a regional fuel tax is Auckland. My constituents are paying. We will probably end up having to, given the cash situation, the financial situation that we're going to face in the next 10-year plan, have to put back on the table issues of asset ownership. And I think that given some of the legacy comments from ministers who are senior ministers in this government, comments that they have made in opposition, we ought to try and revisit those issues, because I don't want to get to a situation whereby the legacy here is a cost that is paid for by the outer suburban commuters of South Auckland who are constrained with no grade separation. They pay heaps at the pump and they don't get the benefit really of an improved rail network because frankly we don't necessarily have access because, you know, the RPTP doesn't get us the bus services that we need to get to the train stations in the first place. I appreciate, Your Worship, that the decisions that drove us here are not decisions that you necessarily were the genesis of because they predate you, but where there are consequences here to the decisions that we make today, which will be paid for by ratepayers for a long time. And I would like us to push harder against this government, which is, in my view, getting away with a great deal in Auckland. They would pay for it elsewhere. They should pay for it here.
Thank you, Councillor. The debate is now on the amendment, so anybody speaking will be speaking to the amendment. But before we commence that debate, I need to know whether or not the statement made in it as being inconsistent with Section 80 of the LGA is accurate. Could I just ask somebody from legal, Danny Gardner and Anita Furness, I'm not sure which of you you've had a chance to look at the amendment. Can you just tell councillors whether the statements that are part of that resolution are accurate or not?
Thank you, Your Worship. In terms of F1 and the statement that the decisions recommended to you today are inconsistent, constitute inconsistent decision-making in terms of Section 80, our legal advice is that is not the case. This is not a Section 80 situation. That section is designed to deal with a situation where the council has a plan or a policy, and it is making a decision that is significantly inconsistent with that plan or policy, and that decision does not itself amend the plan or policy. What Section 80 requires is that the council must at that point identify that there's an inconsistency, the reason for that, and indicate its intention to subsequently amend the plan or the policy. Here, what we're talking about is something quite different. The resolutions are to, investigate and progress the car parking strategy, firstly, and secondly, to amend the budgets. So here, the decisions being contemplated don't actually create an inconsistency. They will actually amend the very budget, the very plan that we're talking about. So there won't be any ongoing inconsistency. So we don't see this as a Section 80 situation. I'll let Anita address the consultation point if you would like, Your Worship.
Through the Chair, regarding F2, that the options including recalibrating budgets and the reduction in cash holdings not being subject to consultation in the draft 2019-2020 annual plan. That statement is factually accurate. Our advice to you, as it has been to the finance team, is that there is no express requirement here to consult on those matters, either in statute or in accordance with our significance and engagement policy.
I'm happy to, with the seconders' agreement, remove F1. I think F2 needs to be a matter that lies on the table for debate, because I think we should have covered this matter off. It was not a matter that was germane to the key questions for focus and debate and consultation as part of the draft annual plan.
Okay, the mover, and I presume with the agreement of the seconder, has withdrawn the inaccurate part of the resolution. That leaves it not being subject to consultation, which is true, but of course these changes that are being made are not required to be consulted, was the legal advice we've got. So, speakers now on the amendment. Councillor Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and might I congratulate Councillor Newman on that excellent speech, and I hope he has it written down somewhere or remembers it and prints it off, because I think it should be distributed. It's a good speech, more than good, it's very important. However, what the amendment proposes is to get some balance, I guess, perspective in the decision-making process. We are frankly being log-rolled into a major decision of enormous cost to our ratepayers. We have not yet decided or unable to decide where all the money will come from. And I think it's prudent indeed that we do not make a final decision today. And as I understand it, that is exactly the objective of this amendment. Mr. Mayor, we heard earlier when officers and even Sir Brian Roche were questioned, key questions were unable to be answered. Frankly, we do not have all the information. If we go back to the Local Government Act, I think it's 76 to 80, there are important principles around decision making and options, assessing options, and having good information is absolutely critical to what the Act requires of good decision making in local government. And apart from the Act, there's been supporting papers around the principles of decision making, I think from Ministry of the Environment and others. However, and I would have to say that rushing through and making a decision today is certainly not good decision making. Put it this way, I can't return to my ratepayers and tell them I voted to increase your costs by $500 million, even though I didn't have all the information. Frankly, I'm unable to do that. I believe I would be in dereliction of my duty as an elected councillor to go and sign off on a decision like this without the basic information. Where is the cost escalation? Why is the cost escalation? And why are there delays? And I guess it's part of the problem comes back to governance and the rather odd, unique governance structure of City Rail Link Limited, which is a Crown entity with the council owns a minority share. I have to say the feedback and accountability has been poor. I think everyone would agree on that. We haven't been briefed. We don't know why the project has been delayed. We don't have a handle on why the costs have gone up. We can have an educated guess about construction costs. We'd know that, but then there are the consultant costs. The construction costs, what do they say, gone up 13%? And the client side costs have gone up 31%. Oh, great, that's how many? 636 million, up by 152. What does that mean, really? Hand on heart, who can really tell us? And so that's not good enough. We have to sort that out. Now, as regard to the Crown entity itself, the Minister of Transport needs to stand up here. I heard a few weeks ago that the Superannuation Fund is spending quite a bit of money on planning or investigating a tram tunnel down Queen Street. Now, this is under the Minister's watch. I'm not making this up. I think that we have every right, given the scale of this increment, and I know there is a sponsors agreement which this mayor signed, and as the deputy mayor admitted, he signed in June 2017, and that certainly puts the onus on us to pay for half the costs. At that time, ministers were saying the costs are between 2.8 billion and 3.4 billion, and the council went to its ratepayers on that basis, I think in good faith, I'm sure. We are dealing now with a major escalation, and just to take up what Councillor Watson said, if this is not a blowout, what is a blowout? If this is not a blowout, what is a blowout? Given the circumstances, I think, and given the government's responsibility as the ultimate owner, the senior partner, as it always was, and that's quite appropriate, the government has to take some responsibility here. As Councillor Newman has pointed out, Auckland ratepayers are paying a fuel tax, but the government decided the rest of New Zealand, that was too hard for the rest of New Zealand. So I don't think that's fair or equitable, and the people of Auckland shouldn't be then loaded with another half billion. The property, the City Rail Link will link the New Zealand Railway Network, which is owned by the Crown. That's the ultimate owner, and therefore they have the ultimate responsibility here. I think we need to push back and say no. And until we get information, the information in there may be reasonable and as fair people, that we may then agree to it, because we'll be able to turn around.
Sorry to interrupt, Councillor. You've exhausted your time and the automatic extension I've given you.
I support the amendment.
Right, this is a very straightforward statement. We've got two more comments on it. I think then we can bring it to a vote. Councillor Clow.
Well, I don't know. We've had the staff say really it didn't need to go up for consultation. I'm really a bit agnostic about this. I could vote for this or not vote for it because it's just a statement of fact. We haven't gone out to consultation, so yeah, I'm not sure what I'm going to do, but all a bit meaningless actually.
Thank you. Councillor Simpson.
So my issue is, I think the amendment is absolutely factually correct. My problem is that when someone reads it, they read it with probably the lens that says we should have. And the legal advice that we've been given says we didn't have to, nor did we get to a point that it was brought to the table and we made a political decision, yes or no. All right? So no one can vote against it, Your Worship, because it's factually accurate. What my question is how, somewhere, in all these resolutions, can we add another one that says actually we didn't have to, nor did we decide not to? That's my issue, and I'm not quite sure what to do about it.
Okay. Councillor Cooper.
My question is, like a lot of these amendments, they often are trying to do something, and I don't quite know what it's trying to do, and that's my concern about voting for it. Because how many times have we had someone do something like this, and then every meeting after that, it's like, oh, well, this is here, and et cetera, and it just goes on and on and on. So I won't vote for it. It's very clear we don't need to consult on this. It's a pointless minute to have in our meeting. I don't see the point of it, and so I will not support it. If it was useful, fair enough, but it isn't.
Thank you. If there are no other speakers, Councillor Filipainen.
Sorry, Your Worship. It's actually a question, if that's okay. I mean, I reserve my right, but I am confused based on what Councillor Desley Simpson just said as well. I mean, how do we relay exactly what Councillor Simpson said? How do we end up reinforcing in this particular amendment that we didn't have to go out? Because I'm in the same space as Councillor Cooper, because this reminds me of the $1.5 million for Ngāti, the complex there, and your plan was mentioned. It's like a delay tactic. And I mean, look, this is why I'm sort of saying, look, what are the repercussions in regards to not going out? So, Your Worship, I don't know who is in the correct place to answer that, because if we put this out, the members of the public are going to say, well, then you should be going out now. And then we'll be back to square one, justifying why we don't have to go out. But so, Your Worship, I don't know who can answer that, because, I mean, as a result, I will not be voting for this, because it just, again, for me, reminds me of the 1.5 at Ngāti Otara Park and the delay tactics that both councillors who are doing this particular amendment did the same there. Thank you. Just a question if somebody can answer that.
Thank you. Look, Councillor Sayers.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just listening to the comments, I thought I'd just chip in. When I read through that, if somebody, some member of the public or the press might read that, I think it probably would do the opposite.
Just a point of order. There was a question asked by Councillor.
I'm sorry, we're in the debate. I'll endeavour to answer your question if I take a quick call. But first of all, Councillor Sayers.
Thank you, Your Worship. My comments were just around when I read that, and I suspect that other members of the public might think similar to myself, that it might just prod the question in terms of, okay, so did it have to go out to public consultation? And that's a fair enough question to be prompted, and the answer is no, it didn't. So if somebody's that keen to find out the answer to that, I'm sure they'd find it out, Your Worship. So I'm quite happy to support.
The answer that I have from the Chief Executive Officer, that what is contained in how we would fund this commitment, none of the elements in the normal course of events would have been taken out to public consultation. So the cash holdings, the revaluation of operating commitments, the investigation of concessions on off-street parking or the flexibility of timing of contributions. If we had a full month under a normal budget process, none of these items would be recommended by officials to go out to consultation. So what we're saying in this resolution is take something to consultation that we would not normally take. So I hope that answers your questions, Councillor and Councillor Simpson. So I'll put this on the voices. All those in favour of the... I'm sorry, Councillor Hulse, I didn't notice that you'd taken the call.
Mr Mayor. I'm just checking, is this an amendment or a recommendation?
It's an amendment.
Because I was going to suggest an amendment that simply adds a comma to after annual plan and says, nor was this legally required. Seeing that it is a completely, it's a simple statement of fact, we may as well make it a genuine statement of fact. If that is indeed the intention of the mover and seconder, if they aren't prepared to add that, then I don't necessarily believe their view that this is simply a statement of fact. If they won't add that, then I can't see the point of voting for it because it is not a statement of fact. So I guess I'm saying, people have said, look, vote for this, it's genuinely a statement of fact, then add the words.
Is it the desire of the mover in the amendment to accept that amendment?
I think the A-team's under pressure. I'm happy to accept the wording changes. That's fine.
Well, perhaps I can add another one to Councillor Hulse's amendment. Nor would it, in normal circumstances, have been taken to consultation according to advice of officials. That then makes the amendment totally meaningless, quite frankly, and I think everybody around this table understands that. So I'm going to. I'm sorry, I just don't have time for game playing like that. I'm going to put this...
Mr Mayor.
That's the one.
I have deliberately chosen not to speak yet because I want to reserve my right to speak, and I'm not sure whether we're working understanding orders today or whether we're not, because sometimes that changes. I think that the suggestion that it was not legally required is perfectly
Sorry,
fine.
Councillor, are you taking your right to speak now?
No, I'm taking offence at the fact you suggest this is game playing.
Exactly.
Well, we just heard that, but please, if you would like to take the call, I'm happy to give you, Councillor, I'm happy to give you the call, but there are no other people waiting to speak, and I've signalled a couple of times now that I was going to put the amendment to the vote. But if you would like the opportunity to speak, please take this opportunity now.
I will take my opportunity. All I was confirming is that, and you asked the question, was the mover and seconder happy? And as the seconder, I was wanting to say, yes, I am, on the basis that it says, nor was it legally required. And then I would like to speak later in the debate.
Okay, that we will add that in, nor was it legally required. So everybody understands what the recommendation is, that we didn't take it to consultation and it wasn't required. Okay, I will put the amendment. All those in favour, please say aye. Against? No. I think we'll have a show of hands. You want it by division? Let's have a division, and I'll ask Sandra to call the vote.
Councillors, you're voting on the amendment as it is on the screen. Could you just make sure that you press your microphones so we can hear the vote clearly? Mayor Goff.
No.
Councillor Bartley.
No.
Councillor Casey.
No.
Deputy Mayor Cashmore.
No.
Councillor Clow.
No.
Councillor Collins. Councillor Cooper.
No.
Councillor Darby.
No.
Councillor Filipaina.
I was going to say 18, but I won't. No.
Councillor Fletcher. Councillor Hills.
No.
Councillor Hulse.
No.
Councillor Lee. Councillor Newman. Councillor Sayers. Councillor Simpson. Councillor Wayne Walker.
Yes.
Councillor Watson.
Yes.
Councillor Young.
Lost 10 to 9.
10 to 9. Lost 10 to 9.
I declare that amendment lost. We now have the amendment that was proposed originally by Wayne Walker but not moved by him. That's now in the name of Councillor Sayers, so I'll invite Councillor Sayers to say what the amendment is and to speak to it, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. I was probably have moved that more in terms of the technicality that you were looking for somebody to move it. So I'm quite happy to let anyone else speak to it.
Okay, do we have any other speakers to the amendment? Councillor Walker, since you didn't move it, you can now speak to it.
I would suggest to councillors that if you go through the list of items that are there, I don't think anybody would have any objection to those issues being taken into account. I can go through them. Mobility, I think that's an absolute no-brainer. We need to make sure that there is sufficient parking for people that have a mobility requirement. Loading zones, that's self-evident for businesses. Waste collection and recycling, the same. Pedestrianisation of Queen Street and other streets, that's an absolute no-brainer. There will be a parking requirement associated with that. Additional bus lanes, we know that that is occurring through Wellesley Street and elsewhere, and we know that those lanes are taking out parking. Carpooling. Carpooling is arguably the single biggest thing that can take cars off the road. That carpooling can take the form of commercial operations, it can take the form of non-commercial operations, but those cars, which by the way are often shown to be more efficient than buses and other forms of public transport, they still need somewhere to park, at least on a temporary basis. Bicycles and e-bikes, electric vehicles, all of those things, just by the way, are going to need charging facilities in the city. And increasingly, other cities that have smart programs are providing docking facilities for electric vehicles, electric bikes, electric scooters in their parking buildings. We're not doing that, but we're going to need to do that. Some cities are also providing those facilities in the on-street parking network, but we're not doing that. Vehicle sharing facilities, that's happening rapidly overseas, and obviously against a background where there is going to be huge increase in residential population in the CBD, and the officers have advised us of that, and a huge increase in the number of workers. I think, what was it, more than 100,000 increase on now. Some of those people, some of those 100,000 additional people plus in the CBD, some of those 100,000 plus additional workers, some of them are going to need to park. And where are they going to park otherwise if we're losing control of these parking buildings? So I think it's a no-brainer, and all I'm asking for, and I think the movers and seconders are aware of, is that these things are given consideration. And I don't have the confidence that if there isn't something in black and white, that they will adequately be taken notice of. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Hulse and then Councillor Hills.
I think it's just, through you, Chair, I think it was just myself. I will support this because I don't want to look against it. The issue is, and what I'm a little bit annoyed with, is the way that Councillor Walker said, you know, if it's not on paper, it won't happen. Well, the fact is, all of that is already happening. The A for E workshop we had is so specific, like ridiculous. I haven't seen that amount of detail and work done by officers. It's truly amazing on all of this. Every single point that's already here. So it's just unfortunate that for some reason Councillor Walker doesn't know what's happening. The reason why I'm supporting it is I don't want it to look like we're opposed to this work happening, because all of it is already happening within council, within Auckland Transport. Everyone's looking at it. Heart of the City were there at that meeting, and they're all about this and understand all of this, the waste collection, the recycling, the deliveries, the light rail, bicycles, e-bikes, everything is being addressed by our teams already. So I think, unfortunately, this has been put up there as if our staff don't know what they're doing, but they do. I'll be supporting it because I don't want to look like I'm opposed to it, because all of this is actually crucial for our city, and that's why it's already being done.
Thank you. Councillor Simpson.
Thank you, Your Worship. My question was, I thought we're not selling car parks. We've taken that bit out, right? So therefore, the strategy, we're trying to find 50 million here, you know, and ways of using the assets that we have for 50 million, potentially 100, whatever. So what's waste collection, light rail, taxis and electric buses got to do with trying to find 50 million from our car park assets? So I'm not saying that the strategy shouldn't have those things in, because it probably will. But I'm sorry, but it's a no-brainer. Part of my brain just doesn't comprehend how this, what the big long list of things assists finding us 50 million or 100 million. What am I missing? Can someone help me, please?
I think we're in the debate, so I'm not asking anybody to help at this stage. Councillor Cooper.
Thank you. I can't support that. And I think the reason is I do support all of that. And so by voting for that, saying that I don't think we've already got it. If you look at the City Centre Master Plan, it talks about all of that. Pedestrian network, freight and vehicle access, parking, cycle network, it's all there. I'm not going to commission another piece of work for another, whatever, tens of thousands of dollars to tell us what we already know. That is sending our staff on a wild goose chase. And for the very people around the table that are all worried about wasting money here, if you vote for this, you're doing exactly that. And that is where I find this sort of contradictory statements really difficult to grasp why people can say one thing on one hand, one on the other. We have all of this, and to me, voting for this is negating all the work our staff and the community have done on consultation on these documents. So I can't support it. And it doesn't mean I don't support those issues, because I do. I'm just saying it right now. And I support the documents we already have.
Thank you. Councillor Darby.
Well, we're up to N. Why don't we use the whole alphabet? And the staff
I know
will.
it would take too long to explain everyone.
And the
by
staff
one.
will, because they told us that at our workshop on Monday, for those of us that were there. This was raised. I raised this, and I could fill up there. What do we go? We've got O to Z to go. I could fill that up, and we could start on a new alphabet as well, and all add to it. But look, I'll probably support this just because I'd like to move on to what really does matter. But I do ask the mover and the seconder to, if we can scroll up, because the climate change hat is on all of that, and then the climate change hat is taken off because the N is increasing. That is jumping to a conclusion. I would ask the mover and seconder to considering parking requirements for residents and workers and visitors, and it's in the city centre. The CBD stopped being, I think, many years ago, because it's a lot more than that. So that's my request of the mover and seconder, to change the N to consideration of parking requirements for residents, visitors and workers in the city centre. But look, I'd like to move on to the big challenge in front of us, and that's already been addressed, all of that, by our staff in the work that's in front of them.
Thank you, Councillor. If you did want to make that amendment for the mover and the seconder to consider, could you just put that very quickly in writing, because I think I've only got one more call on it. Councillor Clow.
I want to say, Mr. Sayers, oops, and to the seconder, who is, I'm not sure who is the seconder. Mr. Young, I would like to just ask him, could we scroll down again, please? Oh, okay. Could we go to the top? I will support this if the word A, the fourth word in, is changed to the. And that's all I'm saying, and if I will support this, if agree to progress the strategy, because as we've heard from a number of people, this is all in train, it's all happening, and I know it seems a bit petty when I'm getting down to A and the, but it makes a hell of a difference to me. So I'm asking the mover and seconder to take out the word a and put the. And I'm looking at Mr Sayers across the room, he's nodding, and I'm looking to Mr Young, he's nodding. So I will support this with the change of the fourth word. The strategies, okay, strategies, okay. Yep. So I'm happy to...
Okay, I just
support
want to check that the mover and the seconder are in favour of the change recommended, first of all, by councillor Clow, and I get an assent.
Both of them, Your Worship.
And secondly, the amendment by councillor Darby, which is not up yet, so let's pause. Let me just say, these seem to be very peripheral compared to the issues that we've got in front of us. Nobody's against it. Many people don't think it's necessary, but let's deal with it and let's get back to the substantive debate. So the first one has been agreed to, and now if we can scroll down to the amendment suggested by councillor Darby. Is that correct, councillor Darby? Yes. Yeah. So consider parking requirements for residence workers in the city centre. Mover and seconder are both happy with that. Let's adopt that. Let's put the... Sorry, let's go back up to the top. Ready to progress the strategies to assess... Yeah.
That's why I
look,
at the start.
I really don't think it makes much difference either way, so I want to put the motion.
Yep.
All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
To the contrary, no.
No.
Carried. Right, can we now come back? That concludes the debate over the amendments. We can now come back to the substantive motion, and I'm just looking to see who's asking for the call. Councillor Lee.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I would like to move an amendment, if I might, that given the significant scale of the projected cost of the City Rail Link, 1.014 billion, and given that this cost increase has occurred during the period of governance responsibility for this project by the Crown entity CRL Limited, that the Council formally approach the Government with a request that the Government increases its share of capital contribution for this project.
Okay, if I could have that in writing, please, up to officers, and the debate is now on that amendment. Yep. So it's been moved and seconded by councillor Walker. And we now have a debate on that. It's a procedural motion, but normally on anything we would have 3 speakers for and 3 against. Okay, if it's a desire of councillors, I'll enforce that rule so we don't debate endlessly today and we do reach a conclusion. So it's a question of anybody wanting to speak to that amendment. We might, for the purpose of an informed debate, it would be probably important that we can put that up before we commence any debate on it. But if you can give me an indication of your desire to speak for or against it, that would be helpful. Yep, Councillor Walker, while we're putting it up, if you'd like, are you familiar with the amendment? You must be if you've seconded it.
Yes, I'm familiar with the amendment. If I can speak to it...
You've got the call, councillor.
I would suggest, first of all, it's doing the right thing by Aucklanders. As councillor Lee points out, the scale of this additional expenditure is huge, and we know already that it is having an impact on our budget. We don't know what the operational consequences are, but they are also going to be huge. I would suggest in terms of timing, and that's important, the time to have that conversation with the government is now, because the longer this case progresses, and particularly our pay down of the City Rail Link, the more difficult it is for us to extract money back from the government. So if you're going to do this, you're going to do it earlier rather than later. It's desirable to do it in this term of government and not to do it in a later term of government. And I am very concerned that the longer that we put this item off, which is around, frankly, ownership but also payment, the more difficult it's going to be. So I support the amendment completely. I would suggest that it would have huge support from Aucklanders, and I don't know who would vote against it.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Sayers.
Thank you, Worship. I'll speak in favour. I don't think Auckland ratepayers should be paying another cent towards this project, and the central government needs to step up to the plate, as you mentioned earlier, Your Worship, as they do in every other city rail project across the country. I think the Councillor Walker makes a very good point. We haven't had answered, and we need to know who owns the project going forward, who's paying the operational costs on this project going forward, and how much are those operational costs going forward. Without that deal with the central government, we just don't have those answers, and we should. And I'd also support the comment that now's an ideal time to renegotiate with central government, given the scale of this, I'll call it a blowout, and it is an unreasonable request. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Cooper, against? Please use your mic.
There are three reasons why. One, before the election, both the Labour government and New Zealand First said that they would pay more than 50%. Doesn't seem to be in any of their agreements that they have to form a coalition. And if it was going to happen, it wouldn't have happened by now. So it hasn't. At a workshop we had recently with NZTA, the Minister of Transport cautioned us very firmly and said, don't expect NZ Inc. to bail Auckland out. So there is no chance we will get any extra money. I don't want to waste our time. The third thing is, we've been told by Sir Brian Roche, this is urgent because it is a constructor's market at the moment. We can't wait any longer. He said we are holding on to these people so that they can do this. I do not want to have another delay, which means my legacy on this council is being part of a council that has left with just a hole in the ground and we can't do anything with it. So for me, this is just another stalling tactic and I won't support it.
Councillor Watson and then Councillor Hills.
Quick to try and expedite matters here, Mr Mayor, and I think the key word there is formally approach. As much as there may have been informal approaches or conversations, I think in a cost escalation of this magnitude, we're certainly bound to see if there is a possibility here and to formalise that approach to the government in terms of a contribution. That is the absolute least we can be done. That can be done reasonably quickly and forcefully, I would suggest, but to just say, well, put up the white flag and or I'm not even going to try, I can't take time to write a one-page letter or whatever it is, that's not doing the best by the ratepayer of Auckland. So I support this. This makes me more comfortable to be able to say to my people in my ward, well, we tried, we fronted up to them, we asked them, and you have that on your conscience that we've done what we could, rather than just not even trying when we're dealing with $500 million.
Councillor Hills, for or against?
I'm against this amendment. 5 minutes ago, we were being told by another councillor that it didn't matter where the money was coming from, it's coming from Aucklanders, whether it's half and half, no matter what. We've been told by the Minister the other day there is no more. They're putting up 500 million extra. I mean, 18 months ago, we had a ATAP budget for Auckland for 20 billion. We now have a $28.5 billion budget. So we've increased our ATAP budget by 8 billion not long ago. We've already been told, we've already formally, CRL Limited, everyone, that's formal approaches. It's not just chatting chatting away on the phone or sending a text. It's already been asked. The work has been done. We actually look so unprofessional right now. This day of filibustering is just bizarre. We know they are not going to increase it. When would we next make a decision on this? If they come back, they're going to come back formally approach, and then we'll get another letter back, and then it'll be back and forth. I mean, it's just absolutely bizarre. And, you know, it is game playing. This is just bizarre stuff. I'm not going to vote for this. Of course, we would love the government to chuck us more money, but we know what the answer is already, and this is just a delay tactic, and I don't want another delay to increase the cost even more and make us look ridiculous. So I think we just need to move on. I'll be voting no.
Point of clarification, Mr Mayor.
Deputy Mayor Cashmore.
Is it correct, sir, you have actually already written to the government and had a reply in the negative on this item?
That's correct. Yep. The question is, have we done it? Yes. The other question is, if the council decides as a body that it wants to formally put this, if it gets a majority of councillors to the government, we can certainly do that. Will the reply be any different? There's nobody around this table that thinks that it would. Would the National Party in opposition be in support of that? No, given the track record that they negotiated this. Would the coalition partner be in favour? No. Doesn't stop us doing it, and I'm happy that we can do it, but please do it in the knowledge that a genuine effort has already been made and an answer has been given. But if you want to put on record the council's request, then I'm relaxed. Personally, I'm relaxed about that. But again, it's not getting to the substance of what we really need to determine today. It's a symbolic action. What we're looking at is making a real decision on whether we're going to proceed with the CRLL, which is what today is about. Councillor Fletcher. Sorry, I should ask, everybody implicitly agreed that we'd have 3 for and 3 against. We now have 3 for, so Councillor, are you speaking for or against?
Well, I wasn't allowed to speak on the earlier motion, which I had my hand up for. I was going to speak for the amendment and also for the earlier amendment that I was denied speaking rights on.
Well, I put the suggestion earlier. Let me put it again formally. Are councillors in favour of now enforcing the 3 for and 3 against standing order? I'll go with the majority of what councillors want. This is an important debate, but we are now at 3:22 in the afternoon and we began at 9:30 this morning. So could I, sorry, I just want an answer to that question. Can I please have a show of hand for those in favour of enforcing the 3 for, 3 against amendment? And can I just get...
Is that just for this amendment, Your Worship?
This is for this amendment, but when the suggestion was made earlier, we can put it again over the substantive debate. I prefer it to be about the amendment because I think we all know where the amendment's at. So, point of order, Councillor Lee.
Is it speakers for and against an amendment? Are they not consecutive speakers? Because we've had some for and some against. And Councillor Cooper, for instance, Councillor Hill has certainly been strongly against.
This is, sorry, just to answer your question, this is for the amendment, and there is no provision, understanding orders as I understand it, that they have to be consecutive. It's about having, determining that there be 3 speakers for and 3 against. It's a very straightforward rule. It's just so that we can facilitate debate where, you know, the issue's clear-cut. I don't think there's anything really complex about this. I want to work according to what the majority of councillors want. If I can just ask Sandra just to count on an indication of show of hands for... I'm sorry. Actually, I stand corrected. If 3 consecutive speakers in support or opposition can call the speaker to the contrary, can call for a speaker to the contrary, and if no speaker to the contrary, the chair must put the motion after the mover's right. So I'm just trying to remember what the order was. No, we haven't had 3 consecutively for. So Councillor Fletcher, you have the call.
Thank you, Your Worship. Earlier today, at the beginning of this meeting, as part of your opening to each council governing body meeting, you asked us to have the strength to act on what we believe. And I think what you're hearing today on a whole range of issues is actually where people are acting on what they believe. This is quite an extraordinary debate today. We're not just talking about what we'll put on this berm or what we'll... This is actually building on over 100 years of history of protracted discussions. Councillor Cashmore, the Deputy Mayor, referred to some of the history on this. He referred to Robbie, but it goes way, way back, much earlier than that. It goes back to when we had a rail station at the bottom of town that in the 1930s got moved over to Beach Road, and we saw declining patronage in public transport because it wasn't convenient, it wasn't well placed. We saw the work that good councillors from earlier councils put into making sure that we had, and I'm going to talk about people that were opponents of mine, but they made sure that we preserved options for the future, because each council as it came along wanted to be able to see the site being used to its optimisation. And Robbie was quite right, and it was Sir Robert Muldoon that killed it. It was his ambitious plan that if we could get that rail back into downtown where the people were, if we could then have a loop that people would get out of their cars and they'd actually start to use public transport again. And he was quite right, and I regret entirely that Robbie at the time said, no, never work, cost too much, and we did nothing. So today is a great day, because I think what you're hearing from everybody is that we do want to see this proceed. We all agree it's the most important project in New Zealand at this time. You, Your Worship, have said, oh, well, you've already written to the government and they're not going to change their mind. You didn't write to the government with a resolution of all of your colleagues all supporting the government actually coming to the party in a better way. Now, for me, what I would really like to see, and I think this is a critical stage in the negotiation that we're in, is to actually know who's going to own it, because as we've already heard today, it will be the ongoing operational costs that will be the killer. We're talking to the public about what the CapEx costs and what the implications for them are going to be, but we know that the hard yards come into the ongoing funding on OPEX. So if we could all just get out of the rather petty mode we all seem to have got into and say, well, what if we had one last go in a united way of writing to the government and saying, could you come to the party on this in a way that is going to give us comfort? Because as I discussed when I spoke earlier today, we need to bring the public on board. We need to give them the confidence that we actually have thought through all of the issues. I was very happy to support the amendment being put up by Councillor Sayers and Councillor Young. And it might be that a lot of that work was being undertaken. But one of the greatest partners we have had in the downtown area has been the Heart of the City. And they came to us with an impassioned plea today to say, please take into account all of those things. And you, Your Worship, you've made, I think, some really great improvements from the workshop that we had on Monday to what we're actually debating here today, by virtue of the fact that the collective eyes of all of us have seen how we might improve whatever resolutions are passed. I was so grateful that you were willing to include D, that the council staff continue to get the best arrangements with the Crown for CRL funding and to update budgets to reflect flexibility around the timing of the council's CRL contributions. Where would the council officers be if we could provide them with a letter reinforcing that the minister could actually understand this is a council that can stand united, this is a council that can stand up for itself, this is a council that believes that it hasn't had a fair share out of central government. This is our opportunity to speak up on this. It shouldn't be seen as a sort of loss of face, or you did this or you did that, and they came back and said no. I think this is about really being able to go back to the public and say we gave it our very, very best shot. It shouldn't take more than a week. It shouldn't take more than 2 weeks. But, you know, the old saying of act in haste and repent in speed. I applaud Councillor Lee for putting this up, and I know that he has suffered some criticisms for doing so. But when the history is written of this, and we look back and say, oh, no, even though it was the biggest debate of this term of council, we didn't have time to go up for another week. Oh, we had to rush on and we had to do things. I don't think the public will look favourably on us. This is a good opportunity to act on the strength to act on what we believe, which is what you implored us earlier today. And I hope that we can actually just put aside our political differences for a moment and actually give support to Councillor Lee's amendment.
Right, at this stage, because of the time, I have to move that and that the business of the governing body continue until we complete that business. I'll move that, seconded by Councillor Darby. Those in favour, please say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. Carried. And my next speaker is Councillor Darby.
Can we, at the moment, there's 2 motions up there because there's a full stop. And can we please there's been some changes since it went up on the screen. It's rightfully been clarified that it's an amendment by way of addition, because I was very confused. It's been corrected in that the 1.014 is an increase in cost. It formerly, when it first went up, it showed that was the cost. That would be fantastic if it was 1 billion. Never your responsibility, Councillor Lee, never, of course. So can I just...
I don't like bullying.
Can we just clarify, the motion at the moment does not... Okay, now it's been changed again. Now, also, it's not a projected cost, it's an estimated cost. Projection is a reflection, estimation is going forward with the knowledge of the numbers. So that's up to the mover, because there is a massive difference between the two. But it is now starting to shape up. But the word projected is actually correct. We're not dealing with projected costs.
Thank you. Next speaker, Councillor Newman.
Thank you. Thank you, Your Worship. I refer to the sponsors agreement that was referred to earlier by Councillor Lee. It's on the City Rail Link website. Front of that website is a lovely photo of you and the Deputy Mayor and the Minister of Transport and the Minister of Finance. And the purpose of that sponsor agreement, the head of agreement, is to optimise the planning, the funding, the operating model. And so all I want to say, Your Worship, in response to this amendment is to read 3.3 of that document. Quote, if during the period pending the sponsors agreement comes in to effect, a matter arises outside of the reasonable control of the sponsors which either sponsor considers might result in a fundamental change in project assumptions or might have a significant adverse effect on the planning, budget, funding or procurement of the project, then the sponsors shall, in good faith, meet and discuss the consequences of such matter, including the feasibility of any workaround or mitigation measures, and how and whether the project should proceed, end quote. So I simply conclude, Your Worship, by thanking the mover and the seconder of the amendment, because it gives effect to the very thing that's in the heads of agreement.
Okay, Councillor Hulse.
Just a question of clarification. Does this presume a hold up in the process, or is this simply a let's, as partners in this, let's be talking about this? I just wonder if the mover could clarify, because we've had 2 quite different takes on this. Is this, Councillor Lee, us waiting for the clarification from government before we proceed, or is this a process that we might employ as we continue to work through with our partner?
Just reading it on the wording of the resolution, it does not imply a delay. It simply allows council to express the view, if it votes to do so, that the government should increase its share of capital. We've had very clear warning, I think, from our officers and from CRLL that a delay in this agreement would have consequences that would delay the project, and the project would cost more. I think you've got to read the resolution as it's written.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. That's very useful, because there were comments to my left about we couldn't just wait another week to write a letter, so that's a concern. I guess my issue is I thought that D on page 10 would presume that this would be an ongoing discussion, and I think this is a somewhat superfluous recommendation. I think it's already there.
Okay.
I however, again, these amendments are coming up, and, it looks churlish to vote against, let's talk to our partner. If that's all it's saying, let's talk to our partner, well, I kind of presume we are in D, so I don't quite understand the amendment, but then there have been some rather odd amendments today anyway. So let's see.
Thank you. If I can speak briefly on this, because we do want to conclude the debate. I intend to support the amendment, and the reason I intend to support it is that it doesn't delay it, and that it is consistent with the letter I've already written to ministers, but I think there's something to be said if the council votes for this, that this is the view of the council as a whole. Let me tell you what our weakness is, and our weakness is a resolution that I have in my hand of November the 11th, November 2011, voting on this, voting to agree to a 50% funding. Every councillor here, including the mover and the seconder, that was in that meeting, voted in favour. They explicitly said we are entering into this agreement on the basis that it will be 50-50. And that undermines my position completely as mayor to go along and say to the government, this isn't a fair go. And I happen to agree with Councillor Fletcher and one or two other people that have spoken in the debate. I don't think it is a fair go. It's not an agreement that I necessarily would have leapt at had I been a councillor or mayor at the time. But it is the agreement that this council entered into. Well, that may be. Please let me go on. I don't want to hold this debate up longer than it needs to be. That is the weakness, because what the government has said to us in reply, your council voted for this deal, and they voted for this deal with the last government, and we don't intend to change it. Now, I will not desist in my efforts, and I do it regularly with ministers, to say that I think that whereas Auckland is prepared to pull its share of the weight, I think this goes beyond what the government has asked of other councils. And I know probably that would be a widespread view. Councillor Walker says he voted for it because there was no choice. That's absolutely right, and we're in a similar situation today. There is no choice. We have to go ahead with this project. If we delay it or we stop it, this city will gridlock, and everybody that votes for that will be held to account for that in due course. And $700 million already invested in the work done to date would be wasted. I don't know that anybody feels around this table that that's a good idea. But by all means, yes, let's make the point, because I hear from parliamentarians outside of Auckland that somehow they think they're subsidising us. To the contrary, they're not. We are pulling our weight. We are paying not only our share, but I would argue that because every Aucklander is both a ratepayer, or every Aucklander that owns property is a ratepayer and a taxpayer, we're paying more than our share. We're paying twice, as it were. So I'm happy to make this formal approach on the part of council, and we'll do that immediately. But I'm being totally frank and honest with you by giving you the reply that I've already got to a formal approach that I have made. It might make a difference. You might think that councillors vote for this, and it's a majority of councillors. I hope so. but I don't believe so. And I think Councillor Watson and I are pretty much on the same path on this. So, and let me just say, in answer to the question, the document that I signed with the Deputy Mayor, I also have the voting record here on it, and we set out what was in the document, and I understand that was also passed unanimously by councillors. Carried unanimously, it says. That's on the 29th of June 2017. In fact, I've got several sets of minutes here where councillors on May 2012 and June 2000, well, the one I've just read in June, but in May, councillors also voted with no dissenting votes to confirm the 50% share of the budget. So therein lies our challenge. We've agreed to this. We can't change it unilaterally. Can we speak out and say, yep, we're going to go ahead with this, but we are carrying more than our fair share? I think we can say that, and that's the reason that I would support this amendment. So I have no further speakers, so I'll put the vote. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no? No. Carried. Right, we now come back, maybe, but that's the will of the council. We now come back to the substantive motions, and I ask those that haven't yet taken a call on the substantive motion but wish to do so to now take a call.
Clarification, Your Worship. With regards to the amendment that has been put, it differs to the D insofar as this is a formal undertaking by elected members by you and not officers. Can I just be clear about your understanding of this?
You can. It is different from D, is that D, on an ongoing basis, we will be seeking the best deal we can out of government on a whole lot of things, more than just the capital cost. This is around the capital cost. Okay, I'm now asking for councillors that wish to take a call on the substantive motion. Councillor Darby.
Thank you. Mayor, you haven't spoken to date on the substantive. At the outset, and reflecting on the most recent motion, can the Democracy Advisor put up the words that I was suggesting to beef up the D? I think it's the D.
That will then, well, I actually, thank you, if we put those up.
Can they be by, look, I'm trying to, sort of,
yeah,
if it's
I think with the agreement of the seconder, I'd be happy to accept that. It's a point I've actually made in my recent comments, and I've talked to Councillor Darby about. So just if we can just take a minute to get that up without the three.
So we have, I'll just speak to that part because I think other speakers have covered many other points and it's been good. But Mayor, I think we are bound, and you've reminded us just then of what we all voted for, and I think only 3 councillors around this table did not support that 2017 resolution, and they were one councillor who was absent for whatever reason, that's Councillor Watson, Councillor Young, a new councillor, as Councillor Bartley as well, a new councillor. They were not there for that resolution, I don't think, in 2017. But everybody else did. Everybody. And it may not sound like that, but that is the truth. And there's no running away from that unanimous motion. Just on this, and this is really what I want to speak to, Mr. Mayor, because I think we are going to find ourselves absolutely bound to what we signed up to, heads of agreement, and then the sponsors agreement, and then the project delivery agreement. So when you've signed 3 documents saying you'll do it on a 50-50 basis, and then you want to extricate yourself from that, good luck. You better be well armed, and I don't know what the armoury looks like.
A little thin.
A little thin. I'm sure you've seen such approaches in your 30-year career, Mr. Mayor. But going forward, beyond the capital expenditure, we are still at risk of the maintenance and the operational spending. And as we all well know, the exposure can be greater on operational over the enduring life of a project and the maintenance of it, and ultimately the ownership, and that will be part of discussions going forward, than actually paying for it on day one, the construction period. So what I'm signalling here is this is our opportunity. We are not bound at this stage on maintenance and operational spending. This is where we need to have a very hard conversation with the government. I would hope that we don't own this project. Ultimately, we don't own it, that it is transferred to...
Own the assets, you mean?
The product of the project, yes, the asset, ultimate asset. And I draw your attention to an interesting letter that Minister of Transport, Honourable Phil Twyford, wrote to the once upon a time chair of NZTA, Michael Stiassny. And he said he was giving direction in this letter, and this letter is dated 14th of May last year. And it is a very interesting letter because he gives direction to Mr. Stiassny, the then chair, to effective, and I read, effective immediately, the NZTA has the following function, quote, open quotations, to plan, fund, supervise, construct and maintain, and I'm emphasising maintain, rapid transit networks and or projects including light rail. Now, it's not exclusively light rail, it's about rapid transit projects. And I think what the Minister is signalling here is the taking ownership of maintenance of the CRL. I think we need to quiz him on that, and the operational expenditure that goes along with that. That, in some ways, is going to make the substantial spend, the capital spend, pale away a little bit. I know, I'm not suggesting that it's no small spend, but the operational expenditure, maintenance, and the ownership of this going forward is going to be a massive mortgage to somebody. And what I'm emphasising is going forward, we need to let go of that responsibility and, as signalled by the Minister, allow the Crown to take it over. That's the win that I would like to see us have going forward. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor. That's helpful. Councillor Filipaina.
Thank you, Chair. I wasn't going to speak, but I'm just going to spend about 2 minutes having my little kōrero. So look, I will be supporting the recommendations as outlined, Your Worship and fellow councillors. When we talk about the genesis of this project, I go back to 2014, but also go back to the 1st of July in 2017 when the CRLL was established. I also did a check on Mr. Sweeney because I always do checks on people I don't know. And I did a check on Mr. Sweeney and found an article dated the 25th of August 2018. And I saw his history in regards to the work that he's done. So we're fortunate to have somebody of his calibre. And go and read the article about it and the fact that he identified just in the interim that there are some issues with the figures that we got from 2014. So we are fortunate to have him. So, Your Worship, look, I will be supporting this. I do have, however, one piece of advice, Your Worship. And I've been a councillor since 2016. And I've only been on one team. And one team is the community team that I have been on. I've never been on A team, B team. So if people around here don't know which team you're on, maybe you shouldn't be around this table. But there is no A team or B team. There is a community team. And I just was a wee bit offended when I heard Councillor Newman say what he said. So look, for me, community team will always be the one. And go Labour. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor. There are no further calls, so, sorry, Councillor Hills. And Councillor Sayers, I'm advised that because you moved an amendment, you're deemed to have participated on the substantive debate. That's the advice I've got. Councillor Hills.
Thank you, Chair, for allowing me to speak finally on the substantive after almost, over 6 hours now. I think it's incredibly disappointing that the money has increased. The budget has had to increase. The cost has increased. We would love to be spending this money on other things, but I just want to give some kudos to staff who have worked nights and worked hard and worked quickly to allow us to do this massive infrastructure project with an increase of $500 million without us having to go back to our communities and tell them what we're going to cut off them, what safety projects we were going to cut, what public transport projects we were going to cut, what park projects we were going to cut. We don't have to go back to our communities and tell them we're going to take things away from them. Yes, this is frustration, and yes, of course, if we were able to do more of other things, that would be great. But this is here. You know, we would think back to Britomart when that had a 50% cost blowout at the time. We would not look back to then and say we shouldn't have done that because there was a cost increase. There's a cost increase then, there's a cost increase now. There's private developments all around the city with massive cost escalation and blowouts. It's not just the public sector, it's the private sector too. We need to get on with this. We have had so many delays on this project. You know, the council pushed ahead of the government at the time who said they didn't want to start this project till 2020. So can you imagine if we were starting the downtown works next year, how much this project would cost? So thankfully for the last couple of councils who pushed this forward and pushed the last government to jump on board as well. So I just want to say thank you again for everyone who's worked on this to try and get the best result. Clearly, it's not the result we wanted. We do not want an increase of this magnitude, but we do know the cost of not doing this would be terrible for our city. We've got holes in the ground all over the place already, so that leaving it like that would not be good. But we also would not have the increase in rail. We would not have the spaces in our city being rejuvenated. We would not have the space for our North Shore buses and future connections for rail across to the shore. We would not have the basically bringing our suburbs closer to the city and quicker, which unlocks a lot of things for a lot of people. So everyone's going to crack us for increasing costs. Well, we don't have a choice. We want to go and tell the people who have tendered for this job to do it cheaper. They're going to turn around and go, we're going to go somewhere else. So, yep, we're here. It's happening, and I also want to back up Councillor Filipina when, we're not on teams. We're Team Auckland or we're Team the Council. The delays today on this conversation, but when people keep throwing out side jokes about teams, it's really annoying. I don't think people want us to be teams. They want us to back good stuff for our city and get it over the line and not waste all these people's time who've been sitting around here for 6.5 hours and we're on the first part of our agenda. So, thank you.
Thank you very much. Speaking in reply, it has been a long debate, 6.5 hours, but there are probably very few issues that come before us collectively that are as important as this one. And the recommendations require us to do two things. First is to decide, do we want this project to go ahead? If you don't want this project to go ahead, then you'll vote against the recommendations. The second thing it asks us to decide is how we fund the $500 million, a substantial sum of money that we need to find in order for the project to be concluded. I want to address the first question initially. We could walk away from it. That was the first question that I examined, not for very long, I've got to say, when I considered the letter that we received, I think, on the 12th of April. There's two reasons why you wouldn't do it. We have sunk $700 million into it. If anybody wants their legacy as a councillor to be a long hole in the ground from the old post office up to council, then voting against that will be your legacy. You might even be buried in it if you wished, because I don't know what else we'd use it for. The second thing is it conceivable that we can address our transport needs as a city, growing still by 40,000 people a year, without a city rail link? Now, actually, every one of you have already made that decision because you voted consistently for. Some of you for nearly 9 years voted consistently for the CRL and on the basis of how it was funded. And the answer is very clear. This City Rail link, as we found out when we last examined that around this table, will be carrying up to 54,000 people an hour in peak times. We are becoming gridlocked as a city. There are multiple solutions that we have to implement to stop that turning this city into a gridlocked disaster. But integral to that, as you've been told by Auckland Transport, is the completion of the City Rail link. Without it, we've increased our passenger trips from 12 million by rail to 20 million, 21 million now, and we want to double that again and probably double it again after that. And what the City Rail link allows us to do, most importantly, is double the capacity of what heavy rail can carry. That will help the south, it'll help the east insofar as the eastern loop on the rail line, and it'll help the west. But actually it'll help the whole of the city, because without a transport system that works across the city, doesn't matter where you live, wherever you go to work, study, play or visit, you will be part of a gridlocked city. This project has to go ahead, and when it's completed, and I'm reminded of Chris Darby's comments about the stations, they will look great, and the service will be great, and the public appreciation of public transport is great now. More than 90% satisfaction. We'll be proud of what we've done. We won't be proud if we walk away from it and say, all too hard, we'll do nothing, let this city close down. Nobody, surely, around this table wants that outcome. It'll not only double the capacity, but it'll help a whole lot. For the Western councillors, 17 minutes off Henderson. That sounds pretty attractive if you want to increase mode shift. From the south, 10 minutes off. But this will help the whole city. It'll reduce pollution, it's electric, and that will help us towards our climate change goals, and it'll allow for intensive housing around the rail line. And that is what will happen. You will see intensification, as you have provided for under the unitary plan, occurring around the major transport hubs and the arterial route. Secondly, is this the best way to fund it? Actually, when I first considered this, I wondered how we were going to do this without having to go right back to scratch and consider what I think most of you would find unpalatable, such as a significant increase in rates or exceeding our debt to revenue ratio so that our funding costs went up, or cutting programs that we've all agreed collectively to put in the long-term plan and the annual plan. This is a way that achieves the objectives without the hurt that any one of those alternative options would bring to us. Does it have an opportunity cost? Of course it does. But we have already collectively decided that this project is a priority project. I want finally to say, because maybe in the amendment we moved by Councillor Lee, implicitly but not explicitly, somehow this was the fault of the CRLL or its structure. That simply is not true. It's unfair, it's incorrect, it's dishonest. We made the decision, I'm not directing it at you, Councillor, I'm saying that if the implicit nature of the statement that this was CRL's fault, and you may not have intended that, maybe I'm reading too much into it, that would not, yes, that's exactly right, and that's why I said implicit, and I did, if it was explicit, then I would have known exactly what the resolution meant. I'm sorry, Councillor, I shall withdraw that if the member takes offence, but let me say it in a different way. It would be dishonest to allege that this is the fault of CRLL. That makes my point very clear, and I think will be acceptable to you. The fact is that we agreed that $250 million needed to go into future-proof this line. I don't think anybody around the table's changed their mind, have they? That we have to future-proof, that we can't provide a line that will cater for 36,000 people when we know we need it for 54,000. Secondly, if there was a fault in the original calculation, that fault pertains particularly to an inadequacy of contingency and escalation costs. So another 300 million is in that area. So there, half of the cost of this project already is to do, one, what we should have done first of all, future-proofed it, if we could see the future as clearly in 2011 and 14 as we do now, and secondly, to deal with contingency. The other costs are largely around the inflation that has occurred in construction costs. Could we have done it any other way? Is there anybody that's got a better suggestion than having a competitive tendering process internationally to build the tunnel? Because I haven't heard it. If there is a suggestion that we could have done it a different way, I'm really interested. But I don't think there is. I don't think there is. We had an international tendering process where we took the two best international tenderers that have the capacity to do this job, and we have selected the one that has offered the lower price. Has there been inflation in construction? Right across the world, and particularly right across Australasia. And we're dealing with a market where we've now got $230 billion worth of demand on the commercial construction industry, whereas previously it was 80. So is there any mystery to how we've got to where we are? I don't think so. I think it's all pretty clear cut. We've got it spelt out. We can get more details if we want. We know how we got there. We know the options that we have to fund it, and we know the option that we have either should the project go ahead or not. And I think everybody is probably pretty clear that this is a project that must go ahead. Thank you very much for your indulgence. Thanks very much for your participation in the debate, and individually each of you for your contribution to it. And now I will put the recommendations as amended, A to F, and I'll do it first of all on the voice. If there's a call for a roll call, I'll take that. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against?
No.
Would you like that recorded against, Councillor Newman?
Councillor Sayers.
Councillor Sayers, sorry. My apologies, Councillor. You'd like that recorded against? Okay. So okay. And Councillor Lee against A, which is effectively against the resolution. So, yeah, but if we don't do that, then we won't go ahead with it. Okay, thank you. We can now. Okay. I've had a request to go to item 12 because there are two councillors that need to do that. And sorry. I need a break. Let's take a 5-minute break, have a cup of tea, and we'll come back to